Gunpowder. When you hear of gunpowder, the first thing that comes to mind is absolute destruction. I mean, this stuff was the cause of a lot of suffering and damage during wars. But first, the gunpowder was actually medicine. Yes, medicine. You see, the main ingredient of gunpowder is saltpeter, aka potassium nitrate, which has been used as medicine by Chinese monks for centuries. The monks decided that their lives were just too short, and in typical monk mode, decided to make an elixir for longer lives. Upon further experimentation, the monks combined saltpeter with charcoal and sulfur. While this mixture did not grant everlasting life, it did have excellent flammable and explosive properties when ignited. Initially, their invention was used to create fireworks by the Chinese, but soon enough, the people found a better use for the explosive invention. Gunpowder was now applied as a weapon of destruction during wars, and as early as 904 AD, this accidental invention unleashed a brutal, destructive force that wreaked havoc across the four corners of the earth, as they were used in wars, battles, and revolutions. So maybe the monks should have just stuck to eating vegetables and exercising daily for a longer life. Matchsticks. If you had to constantly strike two stones against each other repeatedly and blow on dry wood just to get fire, I'm sure making a quick cup of tea would have become a very tedious task. However, thanks to a certain British chemist named John Walker, we now have matchsticks. The whole invention of quick fire on a stick all started in 1826, when John was just casually working in his chemistry lab, mixing different chemicals and probably daydreaming about the periodic table. Mid-work, he noticed dried up crusty lumps at the end of his mixing stick and tried to scrape the crust off as any sensible person would. In the attempt to get his mixing stick clean, the friction from scraping against the crust quickly burst into flames. You'd have probably run off like a mad person thinking it was magic. But for John, who was also a businessman, this was the perfect business idea. He figured out what caused the flame and quickly started coating sticks with the chemical to sell as portable instant fire, which he called friction lights. John sold his friction lights for $1 per box in his bookstore, but ever the gentleman, he refused to patent his flamey invention because he believed that sharing his invention with the world was way more important than becoming the Bill Gates of his time. And wouldn't you know it, other inventors copied his flamey invention and equally started selling and distributing matchsticks. Viagra. AKA the blue pill, AKA blue diamond, the best-selling medication for erectile dysfunction, was actually being researched for treating high blood pressure. It was 1990 and scientists were testing a new drug, sildenafil, for the treatment of congestive heart failure, which was meant to dilate the heart's blood vessels. But you see, sildenafil, the active ingredient in Viagra, had a side effect on the men who participated in the clinical trials. The drug was making their organ very hard and erect for long periods. The female nurses first noticed this side effect when men began to act strangely around them. They would lie on their stomachs whenever the nurses entered their rooms to conceal their state of erection because they were rightfully embarrassed. Eventually, one nurse reported this strange behavior to the doctor in charge, and after further tests were done, it appeared that the blood vessels dilating were in their penis, and not the heart that was initially intended for. The sildenafil was definitely working, but in the wrong part of the body. Soon after this discovery was made, Pfizer announced the drug as the miracle pill for erectile dysfunction, and Viagra was born. Microwave oven. The dull halogen lights, the spinning glass plate, and the humming sound that signals done can be found in almost 90% of homes and businesses worldwide today and are used to heat everything from popcorn to pork ribs in a hurry. A man named Percy Spencer was the genius behind the accidental discovery of this indispensable kitchen appliance, and everything began in the 1900s. Spencer was an engineer working for radar technology on a machine called magnetrons, which sounds like the fictional planet of Optimus Prime, but were just fancy tubes that generated radar technology. One day, Spencer is messing around with the magnetron when he realizes that he is quite hungry. He remembers the peanut butter candy bar he had and reaches into his pocket to grab the treat, but he only grabs the sticky, gooey aftermath of what was supposed to be his chocolate. So the guy is just standing there wondering what the hell happened, when it dawned on him that the microwaves were responsible for his melted snack, which quickly got him thinking of all the other possibilities this discovery could have. If microwaves could melt chocolates, then what else could they possibly do? So he threw some popcorn in front of the magnetron, and sure enough, they popped. And just like the smart engineer he was, Percy set out to create the world's first ever microwaves. The first microwaves were not like what you see in your kitchen today, and were actually called radar range, which weighed about the size of a small car. It cost $5,000 and honestly looked like some sort of radioactive monster, so it wasn't really a huge hit at first. Eventually, the size was reduced to fit on a kitchen counter, and this reduced the cost drastically. Penicillin. If you were living back in the era before penicillin was invented and got pricked by something as little as a nail, you'd probably die from blood poisoning, because the only things your doctors could do was clean your wound with hot water and pray. During this time, there was nothing to treat infections. But thanks to Dr. Alexander Fleming, we now have a very effective cure: penicillin. However, the history of this miracle drug was quite dirty, to say the least. See, the good Dr. Fleming had a thing against cleaning his equipment, so he always left them dirty after use. So on one of those occasions, he returned to his laboratory to start another day at work when he found mold growing on a petri dish. Now, mold growing on a dirty petri dish shouldn't be so surprising, but what was curious about this particular mold was that there was nothing else around it. He studied it more and discovered that the mold seemed to stop the bacteria around it from growing. He did more research and realized that the mold itself produced a self-defense chemical that could kill bacteria, and after some tests on people, penicillin would go on to save millions of lives. Tea bags. So it's 1910, and Thomas Sullivan wants to find the cheapest possible way to send tea to customers, as opposed to the very expensive metal boxes that were the common practice. In his defense, the boxes were thrown away after the tea in them was finished, so the guy was just trying to work smarter. Thomas, in his quest to find a cheaper alternative, decided to send his tea samples in small hand-sewn silk bags to his customers. When Sullivan's customers received their tea samples, they were puzzled by how they came, and because they had never seen tea samples sent in silk bags, they put the whole bag in the mug and just poured hot water over the entire thing. And just like that, a super easy and less messy way of making tea was discovered. The customers loved this new style and ordered more tea bags from Sullivan, and soon enough, everybody wanted one. This accidental invention gave Sullivan the idea to start selling tea in those little silk bags officially, which made his business grow beyond his expectations, and the cheapskate quickly became a millionaire. Snow globes. Have you ever just sat and thought that the lighting in your house was just too dim, so you go to the grocery store to buy brighter ones to fix the situation? Well, in the 19th century, a man called Irwin Percy had the same problem, where he thought the light bulb was just not bright enough. The problem was he couldn't just walk into Walmart and order new bulbs, so he decided to fix the problem himself. Irwin's genius idea, however, was to add loads of water and tiny white particles into the light bulb. I don't particularly understand how he thought water was the solution to his problem, but maybe Irwin wasn't that bright. Anyways, the light bulb obviously didn't get brighter, but something else happened. The white flaky particles he added began to float around the water in a manner that looked like falling snowflakes, and this reminded Irwin of Christmas. And wouldn't you know it, Irwin came up with his very first bright idea of the day. He made more of the watery particle-filled bulbs and named them snow globes. The snow globes became such a huge piece at an exposition in Paris where people fell in love with the snowfall effect the globe had when it was shaken, and over time it became a great souvenir and gift when an Australian man designed to add a model of the Eiffel Tower inside the globe to make it look cooler. Ice cream cones. Helping someone else out when they're in need has always been a great virtue, especially when it helped birth one of the world's best combinations of snacks and desserts. It was the 1900s and the middle of the St. Louis World's Fair, which was a major center of exhibition for all the coolest inventions at the time, and anyone was allowed to come in and have a look around. Just a few meters from the entrance of the fair was a young man named Ernest Hamwi, who was selling a waffle-like pastry called a waffle cookie. Next to him was an ice cream vendor, Arnold Forneshow, who had run out of paper cups to sell ice cream. The good neighbor Ernest saw his predicament and decided to help out by rolling his waffle pastry into a cone and offering it over to the ice cream guy. Soon, customers started buying the ice cream and discovered that the cone cup was also edible and very tasty. So bam, the ice cream cone was invented. Potato chips. So it all started one day in 1853 when Chef George Crumb was working at one of New York's finest restaurants when a certain very picky customer named Vanderbilt, who is also the catalyst to the potato chip invention, sent back his french fries with the complaint that they were too thick, soggy, and tasteless. Chef Crumb, who was already in a bad mood that day, got furious at Vanderbilt's complaint and, in one of the pettiest revenge ever, took back the french fries, sliced them as thinly as he could, and fried them till they got super crispy. As if that wasn't enough, he went on to dump half a jar of salt on the fried chips. Chef Crumb was probably very happy with his little stunt, but the response he wanted from Vanderbilt was entirely different. Vanderbilt actually fell in love with the dried up salty chips and even declared them the next best thing after flying airplanes. Yeah, Vanderbilt, I think you're going too far with that one. Soon the news of the salty, crispy potato chips spread round the city, and everyone flocked to Chef Crumb's restaurant like wildfire, demanding a taste. Super glue. Well, this one was quite a sticky and bizarre situation. The accidental invention of superglue all started when a Dr. Harry Coover was asked to design a new type of clear plastic gun for World War II. You're probably wondering how a plastic gun was supposed to help soldiers win a war, and I'm sure the doctor thought the same. Nevertheless, he got to work. During the whole experiment, Dr. Harry was testing a new cyanoacrylate formula that was supposed to be very strong plastic, but the formula kept sticking to everything it touched, and at one point, even stuck the doctor's fingers together. The whole idea of creating plastic guns for soldiers came to a halt as soon as the doctor and his team realized they were onto something much more promising. Everybody on the team focused on finding out everything they could about the sticky formula, and for over 10 years, the doctors tried to refine the substance. They eventually broke through in 1958 and found the perfect balance for the formula, later naming that product superglue. Stainless steel. The next time you're enjoying a dinner by way of a rust-free fork or cutlery, remember to thank 20th century arms manufacturer for hiring Harry Brayley, the English metallurgist who developed a non-rusty gun barrel. While working at Brown Firth Laboratories in England, Brayley was researching ways to improve the erosion resistance of gun barrels, meaning he was trying to make them stop rusting, when he accidentally discovered that by adding 12.8% chromium to iron, it produced a metal that was significantly resistant to rust. Once this was discovered, improvements came rapidly, and factories began manufacturing surgical tools and cutlery from the material. Even beer was now stored in stainless steel tanks, because they were equally highly resistant to corrosion by storing nitric acid. Today, stainless steel is one of the most important metals in use, and is 100% recyclable, and can be reprocessed with its quality reduction. Plastic. If you look at the world today, it's like a giant plastic party. Everything from your morning iced coffee cup to your favorite celebrity's latest enhancements relies on plastic. It's the lifeblood of convenience. Even if it's made eco-warriors shake their heads for decades. But what you probably didn't know is that the 20th century's greatest invention was a total accident. Back in the 1900s, Leo Baekeland was playing mad scientist in his lab, which looked like a scene straight out of a wacky cartoon. He had beakers bubbling away, strange smells filling the air, and the occasional explosion just for dramatic effect. His goal at that time was to create a synthetic substitute for shellac, the stuff they used in varnishes and electrical insulators. Instead, he stumbled upon something far more groundbreaking. Leo, feeling like a kid experimenting and mixing different soda flavors, was brewing a mixture of phenol and formaldehyde. But instead of a sticky mess, he ended up with a hard, durable material that could be shaped into anything. This fantastic blunder was named Bakelite, the world's first synthetic plastic. Now, his accidental genius spread like wildfire, and he became the rock star of the scientific world. Bakelite revolutionized industries, from fashion to technology. While plastic is now the most commonly used substance, it also became Mother Nature's arch nemesis. Despite being an ecological problem, it's hard to imagine life without it, even if you have to suck through that paper straw the next time you go to Starbucks. Safety glasses. You know how glass can be a literal pain, shattering and turning into millions of tiny daggers you wouldn't want to step on? Luckily, safety glass came into the picture in a way that's more accidental than the mirror you broke this morning. Now, an early 20th century scientist named Edward Benedictus, busy with all sorts of science experiments, accidentally knocks a glass flask off the shelf. This moment of clumsiness turns into a huge discovery. Instead of shattering into tiny shards and splinters, it hits the ground and bounces. Edward asked himself, what kind of sorcery is this? It turned out that this flask had been used to hold cellulose nitrate, a sticky substance that had left a thin film inside the flask. Instead of breaking it, the glass cracked, but held together. The scientist realized he might be onto something, quickly abandoning whatever experiment he was working on to focus on this accidental marvel. After a few more drops, crashes, and many lab assistants sweeping the floor, he finally perfected the process, creating a glass sandwich made of glass and cellulose nitrate layers. It doesn't shatter upon impact, as it became the foundation of the safety glass, an invention that found its way into car windshields. In a twist of irony, an accident became why road accidents don't injure or kill as many people as they once did. Velcro. The discovery of Velcro is proof that you can use any sticky situation to your advantage, turning it into a billion-dollar discovery that changed the world. It all started with an engineer named George de Mestral, who went on an adventure in the mountains with his trusty dog. After George and his dog stumbled home from their hike, looking like a walking cactus convention, he grumbled as he plucked burrs, those tiny things that stick to your clothes, from every nook and cranny. Every step was a prickly reminder of nature's clingiest creation. Peering at them through his microscope, he discovered these little buggers had hooks, finer than a pickpocket's fingers, clinging onto his clothes like a needy X. Inspired, or perhaps just annoyed enough, by their tenacity, George dove headfirst into the wild world of DIY inventions. He tried everything from sticky to duct tape, each attempt failing to get the desired results. But after more trials than a courtroom drama, he cracked the code and invented Velcro. Soon enough, it became the fashion world's darling, holding together everything from kids' shoes to astronaut suits. And sometimes, it's literally the little things that stick with you that make the biggest impact. Saccharin. It's 1879 and you're Konstantin Fahlberg, a chemist knee-deep in a lab full of bubbling potions and mysterious substances. Your stomach, like an impatient toddler, starts grumbling louder than a thunderstorm. You heed the call and rush to the kitchen, forgetting that your hands are covered in chemical goo. Normally, this would be a recipe for disaster, but today it's the recipe for saccharin. Now, mid-bite into your sandwich, you notice something bizarre. Your lunch tastes like it was dipped in a vat of candy. This made you doubt if you used sugar instead of salt on your chicken. Nope, turns out your hands were coated in a mysterious substance from the lab. That mystery substance is saccharin, the sweet stuff dreams are made of. Instead of freaking out, Konstantin channeled his inner mad scientist and started experimenting, discovering that saccharin is a mind-blowing 300 times sweeter than sugar and it's calorie-free. He started documenting his findings and conducting more tests, ensuring saccharin is sweet and safe. Word spreads, and soon saccharin is the talk of the scientific town. Konstantin just created the ultimate guilt-free delight. Diet sodas, low-calorie desserts, and ecstatic dieters owe you a huge thank you. Even bodybuilders can sip soda without sacrificing their six-packs. This accident kicked off a sweet revolution in food science, leading to endless innovations in sweeteners and diet goodies. It was all because a scientist forgot to wash his hands. Post-it notes. The discovery of Post-it notes will make you see that there's always a way to turn around a not-so-sticky predicament into a helpful discovery. Decades after its accidental invention, Post-it notes can be seen everywhere, from boards full of reminders to kick-me notes you stuck on your friend's back. It all started with Spencer Silver's mission to create something opposite to what he really got back in the 1960s. Silver was trying to create a strong adhesive that could become stickier than your clingy ex. Instead, he had a weak adhesive that stuck lightly to surfaces, but could easily be removed without leaving a mark. At first, he thought that he messed things up, but Silver saw the silver lining. Now his colleague, Art Fry, was frustrated that his bookmarks kept falling out of his hymnal during choir practice. God answered his prayers, letting him realize he could use his friend's adhesive to create bookmarks that would stick but not tear pages. Like that, the Post-it note was born from the marriage between accidental chemistry and practical need. Soon after, these notes made their way out of choir practices and into offices everywhere, as people were sticking papers here and there on their computer monitors, coffee mugs, and on the head of a friend during a game of forehead charades. Radioactivity. You might already know that radiation is like the universe's way of putting on a surprise fireworks show, but with less sparkle and more invisible energy. Back in the late 1800s, radiation was as unknown as the secret ingredient in your grandma's legendary cookie recipe. Then came the discovery of X-rays, which made physicists like Henri Becquerel perk up like kids at a magic show. Henri had previously rubbed elbows with Wilhelm Röntgen, the rock star scientist behind X-rays, and got the bright idea that his own experiments might unleash some of these elusive rays. Henri was playing with uranium salts, thinking they'd magically glow in the dark when bathed in sunlight, like nature's own glow sticks. He left these salts and photographic plates out in the sun, eagerly awaiting a dazzling display. But of course, Paris weather decided to be a buzzkill with a cloudy day. No sunlight, no show. So Henri stashed his precious experiment in a drawer, probably with a sigh of disappointment. Fast forward a few days, Henri opened the drawer to find that the photographic plates had captured a strong energy image. Uranium salts had been partying without sunlight, emitting energy all on their own. Henri's accidental discovery was like the scientific version of cavemen discovering fire, because it was groundbreaking. Uranium salts turned out to be the overachievers of the element world, shooting out their own rays like rebellious teenagers sneaking out past curfew. Unlike X-rays, these rays didn't penetrate things. They had their own quirks and were even more harmful. Fireworks. You know the fireworks as the explosion of joy you see in celebrations worldwide, but you probably don't know that its discovery was an accidental explosion of genius thousands of years ago. It's ancient China, and an alchemist who fancied himself a future immortal was busy mixing compounds. He thought he was onto the secret to eternal life, but his approach was more, throw everything in and see what happens, than scientific method. So he mixed charcoal, saltpeter, and sulfur, creating black powder, the stuff that goes kaboom when you light it on fire. Instead of an elixir for immortality, he ended up with a potential recipe for instant mortality. Knowing they'd created something explosive, the Chinese stored this black powder in bamboo tubes. One cold winter night, someone decided to light up the fireplace, and following Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. They accidentally tossed one of those black powder-filled bamboo tubes into the flames. The sky burst into a kaleidoscope of colors. One moment you're huddling by the fire, the next you're witnessing the birth of fireworks, a mix of horror and awe on everyone's faces. It was as if the stars had decided to take a nosedive, and all thanks to some clumsy person chucking explosive bamboo into the fire. From that accidental pyrotechnics show, the Chinese went on to refine fireworks over the next 1,000 years, transforming them into the dazzling spectacles we know today. Without his accidental brilliance, our celebrations would be a lot less colorful. Chewing gum. If you're craving a sweet or minty treat to keep your mouth busy until the next meal, pop a piece of chewing gum. But here's a twist, this refreshing staple was never actually invented on purpose. It was more like the result of one man's epic tire-related frustration. Back in the mid-1800s, there was a fellow named Thomas Adams. He dreamt of becoming the next big tire tycoon, convinced he could revolutionize the market with his genius inventions. So instead of using the traditional form of rubber, he decided to get creative. Thomas got his hands on a giant lump of chicle, a natural gum from the sapodilla tree in Mexico. Believing he could use this as a substitute for rubber, Thomas went to work, sure that chicle would revolutionize the tire industry. However, despite his best efforts, Thomas couldn't turn chicle into anything close to traditional rubber. He boiled it, stretched it, mixed it with all sorts of chemicals, but all he got was a bouncy substance that was more like an overgrown, stretchier version of Play-Doh. Probably out of sheer frustration, Thomas stuffed some chicle into his mouth. As he chewed away at the rubbery blob, he discovered it was oddly enjoyable. It was chewy enough to keep his mouth entertained, without sticking to his teeth or sliding down his throat. Naturally, the next logical step was to add some flavor. Thomas abandoned his tire dreams and focused on his new hobby, turning chicle into a delicious treat. He infused it with flavors like mint, sugar, and whatever else he could think of, and just like that, chewing gum was born, as Thomas Adams turned his failure into a flavor-packed success. If you're currently chewing gum and wondering if there are more quirky accidents in history, you can join our Discord to find out more. Kevlar. Kevlar is like the unsung hero that intercepts bullets like a bouncer stopping rowdy patrons at the door, ensuring that those nasty projectiles don't get a free pass. Instead of bullets meeting skin, they meet Kevlar, which stands its ground like a seasoned doorman. But the twist is that it wasn't exactly born out of a brilliant, deliberate plan. Decades ago, scientists were working in their labs, whipping all sorts of different compounds in their quest to discover the next big thing. Stephanie Kwolek entered the scientific race sauce and started mixing chemicals together. But something went wrong in her recipe, transforming what should have been a runny liquid into a thick goo that defied all her expectations. Instead of scrapping the whole experiment, Kwolek decided to roll with it. She spun this quirky substance into fibers that turned out to be 5 times stronger than steel, yet lighter than a feather. That's right, she accidentally stumbled upon a material so robust it could withstand bullets and still make you look like a fashion-forward superhero. So thanks to Kwolek's happy accident, Kevlar is now the stuff of legend, turning soldiers and police officers into literal men of steel. Oyster sauce. You've probably had a few kitchen accidents on your part, but none of them turned into groundbreaking inventions that changed the culinary world. Meanwhile, there's the story of oyster sauce, a big kitchen mistake that revolutionized Asian cuisine. During the late 1800s, a humble cook named Lee Kum-shung was known for his oyster soup. It was a small stall, no different from the hot dog stands you see in your city, but Lee's soup was the talk of the town, and everyone was lining up for some of that oyster goodness because of the aroma of that oyster broth. It had a scent that could make the most disciplined monk drool. One day, Lee was multitasking as he stirred his broth and served his customers. Amidst the hustle and bustle, he forgot about a pot of oyster soup on the stove. Hours passed, and what started as a savory soup was now a thick and caramelized liquid. Lee expected a culinary disaster, but this ruined broth turns out to be the perfect blend of sweet, savory, and umami taste of oyster. He started selling the sauce alongside his famous oyster soup. It quickly became a hit, surpassing the popularity of his soup. Now known as oyster sauce, this culinary accident can be seen in kitchens worldwide thanks to a busy and forgettable Chinese businessman hundreds of years ago. The Big Bang. No, we're not talking about your uncle's explosive farts. Instead, we're talking about the very object that created the universe. The Big Bang was discovered by radio astronomers Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, but they didn't create the Big Bang, or else they would have been gods. Instead, they simply discovered its existence accidentally. It's 1964, and Penzias and Wilson are playing with their shiny horn antenna, believing it could help them learn more about the cosmos. However, they noticed this persistent and annoying static in their data, like someone was always messing with their large space antenna. So, annoyed with the noise, they set out on a quest to find its source, like angry homeowners looking for that neighbor who always plays his electric guitar in the middle of the night. They cleaned the antenna, checked every equipment, and tuned every tool possible, only for them to realize that the noise was still there. It's as if the universe was playing a prank on them. Over at Princeton University, a group of scientists led by Robert Dick were working on an idea that the universe began with a massive explosion called the Big Bang. They suggested it would have left behind residual heat, similar to a cosmic afterparty after the main festivities. The same energy still lingered in the universe and could be detectable as microwave radiation. Penzias and Wilson, however, were still scratching their heads over this cosmic static until they stumbled upon Dick's work. That's when it hit them. The noise wasn't because of their faulty equipment or a kid playing a prank. Instead, it was the whisper of the Big Bang itself, as this 13.8 billion-year-old echo still vibrated through the universe. The two radio astronomers proved Dick's theory accidentally. It's as if they were trying to find a radio station and instead tuned into the universe's origin story. X-rays. Let's say you're at the doctor's office because your ribs are aching. The doctor opens you up, takes a look, and says, "Yep, you've got broken ribs." That's what life was like before X-rays. Thankfully, someone stumbled upon this amazing technology, allowing doctors to see inside your body without turning you into their next experiment. The story of the X-ray begins in the late 1800s with Wilhelm Röntgen, a physicist who was messing around with cathode rays and electricity in his lab. One day, he noticed that a nearby screen coated with fluorescent material started glowing, almost as if it were painted with glow-in-the-dark paint. Instead of discovering a new type of glow-in-the-dark paint, Röntgen found X-rays, invisible rays that penetrate through things like clothing and skin. Realizing he could use these rays to see the inside of objects, he likely spent the next few days X-raying everything he could get his hands on, including some local women. Röntgen had no idea what he had discovered, so he named them X-rays, with X representing the unknown. Despite his limited understanding, his accidental discovery revolutionized medicine and science. Now, instead of cutting people people open, doctors could use x-rays to determine if a bone was broken. X-rays soon found applications beyond medicine, becoming an essential tool in airport security. Thanks to Röntgen, you no longer have to unpack your suitcase at the airport to prove you're not carrying anything suspicious. Smallpox vaccine. If you lived during the late 1700s, smallpox was an uninvited guest at every party, wreaking havoc and leaving behind unwanted souvenirs in the form of scars and death. That was when Edward Jenner accidentally stumbled upon the vaccine for this disease while spending a fine day watching women milking cows. He noticed something strange about milkmaids. These ladies seemed to have skin as flawless as a porcelain teacup, all while others had craters on their skin courtesy of smallpox. Instead, they contracted cowpox because of their up-close and personal relationship with cows who suffered from this disease. Now, cowpox was much wilder than smallpox when it inflicted cows, but is unlikely to show severe symptoms in humans. But because cowpox was already seemingly making a home in the milkmaids' bodies and improving their immune systems, there was no more room for smallpox. Jenner, curious about the possibility of using cowpox to cure smallpox, took some pus from a cowpox sore and scratched it into his gardener's 8-year-old son in what you would describe as the most unhygienic science experiment. While the boy got sick, the symptoms weren't severe. Now, he exposed then the boy to smallpox, only to discover that he didn't get sick. The doctor accidentally stumbled upon the smallpox vaccine, which came in the form of a different disease. He didn't know what he was getting, as his experiment was done out of sheer curiosity and a weird fascination with milkmaid skin. Pretty soon, people were lining up to get their shot of cowpox, as Jenner's discovery paved the way for modern vaccines in an utterly fascinating way. Pap smear. If you had a microscope-wielding dude with a weird obsession with guinea pig reproductive health, you'd get the invention of the pap smear, one of the greatest accidental breakthroughs in gynecological history. Now, it's the 20th century, and Dr. George Papanicolaou, or Dr. Pap, wasn't looking to revolutionize the world of women's reproductive health. Instead, he was more interested in studying female guinea pigs, checking out their reproductive cycles, as if he were trying to solve the riddle of Lady Guinea Pig's monthly drama. So, while he was collecting vaginal smears from guinea pigs and checking them out under his microscope, he noticed that there were stark differences between the cells of pregnant and non-pregnant guinea pigs. He eventually realized that he could probably notice the same trend in humans. Dr. Pap may have spent an awkward dinner conversation and a lot of cash on flowers to convince his wife Mary to be his new guinea pig in this experiment. Of course, his wife wouldn't have wanted him touching another woman's vagina. While observing her cells under a microscope, he noticed that changes in the cells could indicate different stages of the menstrual cycle and reveal abnormalities, especially cancerous cells. His discovery led to the development of the pap smear, a test that could be used for early detection of cervical cancer. But while this test has saved countless lives, Dr. Pap never intended to unlock the mystery behind cancer, because he was just a scientist who happened to have a weird hobby of collecting guinea pig smears. Chlorpromazine. Let's say that the world of 1950s medicine is like a restaurant kitchen, with different chefs trying out new ingredients for that breakthrough dish. But our chefs here are doctors who are looking for that magical spice in the form of a drug that could sedate patients without making them look like they went 12 rounds of boxing with Mike Tyson. So they developed chlorpromazine, a compound that did its job by knocking patients out effectively. But these scientists soon discovered that it had another talent. This compound decided to shake things up by taking a detour into the realm of psychiatric medicine. Scientists noticed that patients who were given this new drug were not only knocked out, but also seemed to be less anxious and more relaxed. Imagine the researcher's surprise when their anesthetic became a mood-lifting marvel. It was like a chef discovering that turmeric tasted good and had health benefits. Its unintentional discovery led to this drug becoming one of the first major antipsychotic drugs. Suddenly, chlorpromazine was the all-around spice of the medical kitchen, helping to ease symptoms of schizophrenia and other mental health conditions. So in a nutshell, chlorpromazine went from being the drug that would knock you out for a nap to becoming the go-to drug of the psychiatric world. Warfarin. It's the 1920s, and you are a farmer in the US. You discover something unusual, as your cows are bleeding to death, making you think that there's a huge bovine calamity that's sweeping the nation. But these cows were not in the middle of a vampire movie. Instead, their hay, partly made of sweet clover, got spoiled and became a sneaky poison. Scientists nearby quickly investigated the situation, wanting to learn what was up with this rotten clover. They discovered a compound interfering with the cow's blood clotting. While this compound was unintentionally turning cows into beef bloodier than that rare cooked steak, these scientists thought it could be helpful for many things. They named it warfarin, which may sound like a wizard's spell, but is actually a blood-thinning agent. Usually, a blood-thinning compound should spell trouble for people who aren't suffering from anything serious, because it would just force them to bleed out to death. However, some illnesses and conditions, like cancer and cirrhosis, cause blood to clot dangerously, making warfarin useful in allowing blood to flow normally. Because of its medical benefits, it went from being the cow killer to a lifesaver. It's like warfarin was born a superhero with a weird power that eventually turned into a valuable skill. And it's all because of an accidental incident involving some unlucky cows. Botox. Tom Cruise can thank Botox for making him look like he's 25, even in his 60s, but while this stuff is your favorite celebrity's go-to fix when they still want to look relevant as they age, it wasn't discovered by some doctor who wanted to make a living out of people wanting to look forever young. Instead, it was an accidental invention. This wrinkle-free story started in the 1980s, when scientists were investigating a botulinum toxin, a nasty substance produced by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum. This toxin was known for causing a condition called botulism, which causes muscle paralysis and difficulty breathing. It's essentially a big nope that could cause much harm. But while it was still causing chaos, the same bacterium also made patients' wrinkles disappear. It's like your 80-year-old grandpa suffering from botulism started looking like he was ready to charm young women again because of this stuff. It was a positive side effect that was hiding under a severe condition. Dr. Jean Caruthers noticed that patients who received botulinum toxin injections to treat eyelid spasms were also experiencing smoother foreheads. It was as if the toxin was giving them a free facelift while solving their eye-twitching problems. And just like that, a wrinkle-erasing phenomenon was born. The cosmetic industry saw this as a golden opportunity and ran with it. Now, Botox is like water to people obsessed with vanity and wrinkle-free faces because they can't live without it. So, from paralyzing people, it turned into a cosmetic that makes those frown lines disappear. Insulin. If you want to see an accidental medical discovery that would have given Scooby-Doo nightmares, let's look at the story of insulin in the 1920s. You might know that diabetes basically makes life less sweet after you've overeaten a cake and ice cream. Now, the two doctors named Banting and Best decided to take on diabetes like Batman and Robin fighting the Joker. But instead of experimenting on humans, the duo went full Dr. Frankenstein on dogs to test their theories about what makes the pancreas tick and its connection to diabetes. Their experiment is so low-tech and practically medieval. They simply took out the pancreas of dogs, who ended up suffering from diabetes as a result of the rough procedure. This allowed them to see that the pancreas was crucial to regulating blood sugar levels. They must have thought, what if we squeeze goo out of the pancreas and inject it back into the dog? It turned out that a liquid extracted from the pancreas was like a magic potion for diabetic dogs, making them feel positively fantastic. Banting and Best, thinking they'd stumbled upon the holy grail of diabetes cures, continued to tinker with this substance until it became insulin. It was a hit with canines, but humans were a whole different ballgame. Enter a 14-year-old boy who became the guinea pig in this grand experiment. Miraculously, he showed signs of improvement, proving that a lucky hunch had transformed insulin from a potential Grim Reaper's visit into a sweet deal for humans. Quinine. Put yourself in the shoes of a European explorer in the 17th century, out on a mission with your buddies to claim tropical lands for your king and country. Sure, the locals might be a bit hostile, but your real enemy was the mosquitoes. Those tiny pests are everywhere, sucking your blood and spreading malaria. Then, in a twist of fate, you drink from a pond and feel better. Turns out, a cinchona tree's bark had fallen into the water, giving it a bitter taste and a surprising medicinal quality. This bark contained quinine, which, unknown to you, was a natural remedy for malaria. It turned into your magical elixir as you and your buddies continued your tropical exploration without fearing those pesky mosquito bites. Legend has it that European settlers accidentally discovered quinine's healing powers. They noticed the pond water made them feel better and traced it back to the cinchona tree bark. It was as if Mother Mother Nature was saying, "Those mosquitoes are a pain, but here's something to help." When word of this miracle cure reached Europe, people quickly embraced it. Quinine was extracted and mixed into tonic water, becoming the 18th century equivalent of a superfood smoothie. Before long, this led to the creation of the legendary gin and tonic. It was the perfect excuse to enjoy a drink while taking your medicine, turning people into casual drinkers with the added bonus of malaria resistance. If you want to discuss your hatred for mosquitoes, or find people who also enjoy their anti-malaria gin and tonic, you can join our Discord. Laughing gas. The discovery of laughing gas is a story that would make you see that sometimes scientists have to take matters into their own hands, or in this case, lungs, to discover a new medical breakthrough unintentionally. Let's go back to the early 1800s, when Humphrey Davy, a chemist, was experimenting with different gases because he was interested in the psychological effects of different gases. That was when he stumbled upon nitrous oxide. He inhaled this gas and promptly giggled uncontrollably. You could imagine Davy rolling on the lab floor, as if invisible hands tickled him while his colleagues looked on with weird fascination. He realized that nitrous oxide wasn't just a gas, but also a ticket to an involuntary comedy show starring an invisible comedian. But if you think that laughing gas is just there for the giggles, there's a deeper side to it. Davy and his colleagues noticed they weren't just having the best time of their lives laughing after a whiff of this gas, they also noticed that it made people less aware of pain, because they're too busy giggling their butts off. So if you're going to the dentist and start laughing like a lunatic, you're probably not going to care much about that tooth extraction, and thus the idea of using laughing gas as an anesthetic was born. The dentist community quickly latched onto this discovery because they didn't want their patients screaming in pain during dental surgery. Patients could now endure dental work without vowing to take revenge for the pain their dentists caused. Instead, they might occasionally break into uncontrollable laughter, which, let's face it, is a huge improvement. Of course, the laughing gas didn't stop there. It found its way into the world of surgery. Surgery, yes. Making operations a lot less stressful for everyone involved. So, thanks to a happy accident and some enthusiastic laughs, we now have a medical breakthrough that lets us get through procedures with a smile and a chuckle. LSD. The 1960s were famous for many things, but three letters really captured the decade's psychedelic vibe: L, S, and D. Interestingly, LSD's journey to defining a whole era started with an accidental discovery. In 1943, Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann was in his lab tinkering with chemicals to create a new caffeine-like stimulant. But as he was mixing different compounds, he stumbled upon LSD, a substance with profoundly mind-bending effects. According to legend, Hofmann accidentally absorbed a tiny bit of LSD through his fingertips and suddenly found himself on a psychedelic roller coaster ride. One moment he was just working in his lab, and the next he was contemplating the very fabric of reality. Intrigued by his unexpected trip, Hofmann intentionally tested a higher dose. This time he experienced vivid hallucinations and euphoria, probably feeling like he had discovered a portal to Wonderland. Fascinated, he dove deeper into studying his creation, eventually realizing its potential as a powerful drug that got into the underground market and led to people experimenting with its trippy effects. LSD soon became a symbol of the 1960s, evolving from a quirky lab experiment to a cultural icon. It fueled artistic creativity, inspired music legends, and made tie-dye shirts all the rage because of the wild, vivid colors you see when you're deep into LSD. More than that, it sparked serious scientific interest in consciousness, psychology, and the brain. And to think, it all started because a chemist didn't bother wearing gloves while working in his lab. Lactose intolerance, also known as the sad condition that makes you unable to enjoy a good 4-cheese pizza. Lactose intolerance is one of those accidental medical discoveries that made people understand that not everyone is born equally able to handle milk. Imagine a person happily chugging a gallon of milk decades ago for that extra protein and calcium, only to realize that his gut always throws a tantrum. That's basically how scientists discovered lactose intolerance. Let's say you were one of the 1960s scientists so obsessed with milk that you all wanted to study it up close. Through thorough research and a ton of volunteers happily drinking milk, you and your colleagues eventually find out that some people's guts don't have the right tools to break down lactose, the sugar in milk. Without these tools, lactose isn't properly digested, leading to some uncomfortable side effects, like gas, bloating, and a general feeling of wanting to avoid public spaces out of fear of exploding into a dairy mess. It turns out that this condition is pretty common, especially among people whose ancestors didn't traditionally drink milk. It's a genetic throwback, like having an engine made for diesel instead of gasoline. Except in this case, your internal engine can't handle milk. So, thanks to some curious scientists, you now know that you can't always serve pizzas and ice cream on that next company blowout because one of your mates could be a dairy disaster waiting to happen.